Now we're going to customize the Corel Painter application a little bit to make it easier to use. First, we'll go to Edit Preferences, and we'll start at the top here with General. These preferences are going to be global settings that will affect the entire application. I'm going to show you how to set this up the way that I like it, but if you want to change any of this stuff to suit your own preference, feel free to do that. The first option is Align Constrained Brushstrokes to Canvas. What this is referring to is you can hold Shift to draw straight lines. I'm holding Shift right now and it's constraining my lines to a vertical, horizontal, and diagonal axis. But if I were to rotate my canvas, then what would happen? Will those lines be at the same angle, or will they remain fixed horizontally and vertically? Let's find out. Let's select the brush tool. I'm going to hold Shift and draw, and I get a line that's parallel to that first line that I drew, meaning that no matter how I rotate the canvas, that angle is going to remain fixed to the canvas. Now, if I want to change that, I can go back to Edit, Preferences, General, and I can uncheck Align Constrained Brushstrokes to Canvas. Now, if I select a different color and I hold down Shift, then it's going to remain horizontal and vertical no matter how I rotate the canvas. As you can see here, still holding Shift to constrain my lines. I'm going to go ahead and just keep this enabled. The next option is Disable Feature Scaling when resizing the brush. Let's select Acrylics and Gouache, and then Detail Opaque. Up here in the properties, we can see Feature, and Feature adjusts the number of bristles. The higher the value, the fewer bristles in the brush. Feature can also refer to other types of brushes as well. I'm going to create a medium brush and make a mark, and you can see each of those bristles. So the feature is going to control the scale of each of these bristles. If I increase my brush size now, then the feature is going to automatically increase as well. So if I make a mark, you can see there's fewer bristles that are farther apart. If I make my brush smaller and I make a mark, you can see those same bristles are a bit closer together. Let's go back to Edit, Preferences, General, and this time let's disable feature scaling when resizing the brush. So now my feature is at 3.5. If I make my brush smaller, it remains at 3.5. And if I make my brush much bigger and make a mark, then the bristles do not change in size and density. Let's try another example here. Let's set the feature pretty high. Let's set it to 50. And let's make a mark. Now we only see just a few bristles here. If I make my brush smaller and make a mark, I'm only seeing one bristle. If I make my brush very large and make a mark, again, it's very few bristles spaced apart. So if I want more bristles, then I want to set this lower. I'm going to set it to 10 and make a mark with a big brush. You'll see if the feature is set too low and the brush is too big, it's going to be very slow. So you'll want to try to avoid that combination. So that's what Disable Feature Scaling when resizing brush does. I go ahead and just leave this unchecked because I don't mind that it scales the feature. The next option is Simplified Brush Sizing Control Legacy Style. If I hold down the keyboard shortcut of Control and Alt, and I tap and I drag my pen, then I see this green circle, which is going to show me the diameter of my brush. If I don't like this green color and I find it distracting, what I can do is I can go to Edit, Preferences, General, and I can simplify the brush resizing control. Now when I resize my brush, I'm just seeing a circle without that color. Personally, I like to see it without the color, but for my tutorials, it makes it easier to see if I use the green. So I'm going to go ahead and set it back to showing the green here. The next option is Show Commit dialog box when converting to a layer. In order to see what this is going to do, we need to create a specialty layer. So let's go to the liquid ink category and let's select drops of ink. I'll select black and I'll paint some drops of ink here. This creates a specialty liquid ink layer. I'm going to create another liquid ink layer. I'm going to click and hold on the new layer icon and choose New Liquid Ink Layer. I'll choose a different color. We'll put down some of that ink. Now we have two liquid ink layers. And if we hold down Shift so that we're selecting both of them, and we group them by clicking down here in the bottom left on Group Layers, or we could use the shortcut Control-G to group them. If we were to merge this group now to fuse these two layers together into a single layer, we could do that by going down here in the bottom left and choosing Collapse Layers. Then we're going to get this warning message that says Commit all shape and plug in layers to an image layer. What this is doing is it's double checking to make sure that it's okay that you convert these layers to default layers. Once you've converted these specialty layers to default layers, they'll no longer be editable in the same way. So for a liquid ink layer, I'd no longer be able to paint with liquid ink and have it still look wet. So you can choose Commit and Don't Ask Again, and then click on OK. It fuses those two layers into a single layer while at the same time converting them to a default layer. And if I go to Edit, Preferences, General, then you can see that it's automatically unchecked Show Commit dialog box when converting to layer. I recommend you go ahead and leave this on so that you're not accidentally converting layers, because there may be specialty layers that you want to still be editable. If you find that you know what you're doing and you're comfortable merging layers and you find this message to be a nuisance, then feel free to uncheck it. Beneath that, we have Create Backup on Save. I recommend that you leave this checked because what it's going to do is it's going to create a secondary backup every time you save. So each time you save, you'll save 2 files simultaneously. This can be helpful because one of the files could be corrupted, or you might accidentally overwrite one of your files, and then you'll have that extra backup. So go ahead and leave this checked. I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'll just save this as Save Test. I'll save it as a Painter Riff. Then I add a little bit more paint here, and I save it. Now if I go to File, Open, then you can see I have Save Test, and I have Save Test _back. This is the backup file. They're the exact same file. You just have 2 copies in case something happens to one of them while you're saving. At some point, these are going to kind of build up and take up extra space. So once you're done working on the project, you can always go through and select these and then just delete them. Next, we have Show Dialog Box when entering presentation mode. We looked at presentation mode earlier, and there was a dialog that popped up telling us how to get out of presentation mode. All this does is show and hide that dialog. Beneath that, we have Show Using Audio Expression dialog box. Audio expression is a particular category of brushes that I don't really use a whole lot, so we're really not going to be talking too much about audio expression. We'll just go ahead and skip over this for now. Beneath that, we have Warn Me to Save Texture. This can be useful when we're working with textures, but for now we're just going to go ahead and skip over it. We won't be using auto record script, so we're going to skip over that, but if you'd like to learn more about any of these things we're skipping over, feel free to check out the Corel Painter Help Guide. Next is Brush Size Increment, which is set to 1 pixel right now. So if I go ahead and I select a brush, let's say the scratchboard tool, which is found in the Artist Favorites category, I'm going to go ahead and set it to a specific size, let's say 1. And right now, it's a very thin brush. Now, if I want to increase the size of the brush using the bracket keys, I can hit the right bracket key, and you can see that it increased to 2. Now I have a wider brush, and if I hit the right bracket key again, it goes up 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. Just moving up by 1 pixel at a time. If I go to Edit, Preferences, General, and I change this now, I could change it to 10. And now when I hit the right bracket key, it's going up 30, 40, 50, 60. Personally, I prefer to leave this at the smallest setting, which is 1 pixel. Beneath that, we have Align Brush to Path Tolerance. We're going to be exploring painting on paths a little bit later, so we'll go ahead and skip over this for now. We'll skip over Paint Hidden Shapes as well. And then finally at the bottom, we have options for tooltips. If we change this, we're going to need to restart Corel Painter to see the change. We looked at the tooltips earlier. They allowed us to hover over features to get some visual feedback that teaches us what those features can do. If you want to see text and images, you can see text and images. But if you prefer to see just text, then you can see just text. I prefer just to leave this set to text and images, so we'll go ahead and do that. So that's it for General. Let's move on to the next tab, which is Brush Cursor. This deals with the different ways we can configure the brush cursor. Under Cursor Type, we have an option for Enhanced Brush Ghost, Icon, or Single Pixel. I'm going to make a pretty large brush, and you can see that this is the Enhanced Brush Ghost. There is a circle which shows the diameter of the brush, and then there is a line emanating from the center which shows the angle of my brush, as well as the tilt. I can change this by going to Edit, Preferences, Brush Cursor, and I can change it to Regular Brush Ghost. And now what I'm seeing is the shape of the dab. Now this particular brush is just kind of a flat brush, so that's what the dab looks like. Now the brush ghost doesn't always accurately represent how the brush is going to look. It doesn't show you the angle, and it doesn't always show you the exact size. So let's change to a different brush. Let's go to Chalk, Pastels, and Crayons. And let's try Chunky Soft Pastel. We'll make a big brush, and you can see that it's a little more clear when we paint with this brush, kind of what we're going to get, but it's still not 100% accurate. So depending on how you like to paint, you might like working this way, or you might prefer to use the Enhanced Brush Ghost. We can also choose Icon. Now if we paint, all we're going to see is this little crosshair. We can also choose Single Pixel. And now if we paint, all we're going to see is this little dot. I'm going to go ahead and change this back to Enhanced Brush Ghost, and let's take a look at the other options. Now we have an option to show icon when painting. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that's going to do. I'm going to switch back to the scratchboard tool. And right now we see the Enhanced Brush Ghost as we're hovering, but once we make a mark, the Enhanced Brush Ghost disappears and all we're going to see is this little dot. Let's go to Edit Preferences, Brush Cursor, and let's uncheck Show Icon when painting. Now if we paint, we see the brush ghost the entire time that we're painting. Let's go to Edit Preferences, Brush Cursor. Let's recheck Show Icon when painting, and we have control over the icon that we see. Right now it's set to single pixel, but we could set it to the default, which is a tiny crosshair. We could have a brush icon, a cross icon, a small cross, a torus, a triangle, a hollow triangle, or a gray triangle. We can also change the color, and we can choose any color we want for that icon. And we can control the angle, so we can have that icon appear at different angles. One of the ones that I like is the hollow triangle. And if we set the angle about like this, and we draw, then you can see I get something that looks kind of like a pencil tip that's at an angle that a pencil would be at. So that one's kind of nice. You can feel free to experiment and see what you like best. Personally, I like to leave this at Enhanced Brush Ghost, and I like to disable Show Icon when painting. Because I use a lot of different brushes at a lot of different sizes, it's actually more helpful for me to be able to see the brush ghost, even if the brush ghost isn't always all that accurate. One of the advantages to hiding the brush ghost is it makes Painter feel a little bit faster when you're painting. But then if you're using something like, let's say, a blender, for example, diffuse blur, and we make a really big brush, and then we turn off the visibility of that cursor, then when we're blending, it's kind of hard to tell where that brush is at and what the diameter is. So while hiding the icon works really well when you're drawing with a thin brush like this, doesn't work so well when you're drawing or blending with a really big broad brush. So for that reason, I feel like, in my opinion, it's better to have the brush cursor show the Enhanced Brush Ghost the entire time. So that's how I'm going to set it from this point on, but you can feel free to set this however you like. Now the point of hiding the Enhanced Brush Ghost while you're painting is to reduce the amount of lag you have while you're painting in Corel Painter. I want to really quickly mention some of the causes of lag and some ways to prevent lag. I'm going to go ahead and select a really big brush here. Let's try thick paint, and then I'll choose heavy loaded palette knife. The canvas that I'm using is 3000 by 2400 pixels, so it's a pretty decent sized canvas. So if I make my brush as big as possible now, 750, and I do a stroke, you can see that there is a ton of lag. I've already completed my stroke, and it's going to take a minute for my computer to catch up. So one of the main causes of lag is brush size, and that can be compounded by the size of your canvas as well. If it's a really large canvas, that's going to make the brushes much slower too. If it's a big canvas and a big brush size, then you're going to get a ton of lag. Now that's not a flaw of Corel Painter. This will happen in any art application, and it's a limitation of your computer hardware. If I make my brush a little bit smaller here and I do some brush strokes, then it's not quite as laggy. Now if I do a really long stroke that goes on forever here, it starts to get more laggy. So longer strokes are more laggy than shorter strokes. If you're using a really complicated, really detailed brush, it can be more laggy. The thick paint brushes and the watercolor brushes and the particle brushes are all a lot more complicated than some of the very basic brushes. If you have a lot of layers in your composition, that can also create some lag. Just as well, your undo levels, which you can set in Preferences and Performance. This can affect how much lag you experience. We'll look at what to set this to a little bit later. Your memory and multi-core usage can also affect performance, but again, we'll be coming back to all this. And then the last cause of lag is a multitasking. You might be painting with Corel Painter, and then in the background, you're doing something like recording your painting, or you're using more than one art application, or you're listening to music or browsing the web. All of these things can take away from your computer resources and slow down Corel Painter, which will cause lag. So let's go ahead and move on to thick paint layer now. Here's where we can set the default amount for the paint thickness. So right now it's set to 100%. And if I select a bright color that I can see here and I paint a stroke, you can see that it has some nice thickness. I'm using the heavy loaded palette knife, but I can double click next to the layer name here, and I can enter the thick paint layer attributes. And this is where I can set the thickness of the paint. So if I want to make it thinner and flatter, I'm going to reduce it down to around 22. And you can see that that paint flattens out a little bit. We'll go ahead and double click again. Let's reduce it all the way to 0. Now we can see that the paint has no depth to it at all. Double click again. Let's set it really high this time to 731. Now it is some really, really thick paint. Now each time we create a new thick paint layer, that layer is going to inherit the default settings. So this new thick paint layer is just at 100% thickness. If I want to change that default amount, then I would go to Edit, Preferences, Thick Paint Layer, and here I can make all future thick paint layers thinner or thicker globally. So if I want to reduce that down to something maybe more like 30, then when I create a new thick paint layer and I paint, you can see that it's not quite as thick. For me personally, I don't like the thick paint to be too thick for an average setting, so I like to leave it set a little bit lower. I think 30 is a pretty good amount, but you can always go through and you can tweak that setting to add a little bit more thickness if you like. I'm going to go ahead and just set it back to its default setting. I'll just type in 100 here and I'll click on OK. Next in Preferences is the Interface category. And Interface is going to control the UI or the user interface. We can control the different themes here. Right now it's set to dark gray, and if we were to change this theme, we would need to restart Painter to see those changes. There's also medium gray and light gray. You can see them side by side here. One thing you'll notice is that the accent colors on the highlighted icons are a bit different. And then there's also Frost and Sepia. Frost is a little bit cooler and Sepia is a little bit warmer. Personally, I don't like these colored backgrounds because they influence all the colors that you see on your screen. So I would choose one of these gray options, but it's really up to you what you like. I'm going to stick with the dark gray because that's the easiest on my eyes. And again, remember, if you change this theme, you'll need to restart Painter to see the changes. Now, if you're using Windows, one thing you might notice is that my application bar up here is not an obnoxious bright white. It's this nice gray that matches the rest of the theme. If you want to change that, it's pretty easy. Just minimize Corel Painter, and then right-click on your desktop, choose Personalize. Then you want to choose Colors. Scroll down a bit here. And then here you can choose an accent color. I find that Storm works pretty well, but you could also create a custom color. And then you want to make sure that you check title bars here for show accent color on the following surfaces. Now, if you go back to Corel Painter, that accent color will appear up here in the application title bar. Let's return to Edit, Preferences, Interface. The next option is Workspace Options Units. This controls the various units of measurement in the Corel Painter application. So for example, we're using pixels right now, so I can control my brush in pixels. And there's lots of other sliders and measurement options and effects that would use pixels, but if I don't like pixels, then I could set that to something else. And I could change it to inches, centimeters, points, picas, or columns. I recommend you just leave it set to pixels. Next, we can change the background color, which is the color that's behind your canvas here. If you don't like that gray, you can set it to something else. You can make it darker if you like, and click on OK to see the change. Or if you want it to be lighter, then you can make it lighter. I want to go ahead and just set it to this neutral gray here. For the same reason that I don't want the UI to be cooler or warmer, I also don't want the background color to be anything but neutral. Moving on down, we have brush icons and custom palettes. Do we want to show the stroke with wide icons, or do we want to show the category? To show you how this works, I'm going to hold Shift and drag out this brush here to put it into a custom palette. And what you're seeing is a representation of what that brush stroke might look like with a wide icon. If I prefer, I can show the category icon. I'll go ahead and select that here. And now if I drag out a brush by holding Shift, then I'm seeing the category icon. I'm going to hold Shift and just drag these out of the palette to get rid of them and delete the palette. I create custom icons for my brushes, so this doesn't really matter too much to me. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it set to stroke wide icons. Beneath that, we have the default view mode. I prefer to set this to single document view so that it's always maximizing my document window. And then beneath that, we have toolbox layout. The toolbox is over here on the left. Right now it's set to vertical single column, but we could also have it be a vertical double column, a horizontal single row, a horizontal double row, a simple single row with fewer icons, or a simple single column. We can also control the appearance of the command bar. We can have a single row, single column, large icon single row, large icon single column, and we can control the visual appearance of the media layout with a horizontal single row, horizontal double row, vertical single column, vertical double column. Personally, I just leave these set at their defaults. That's fine by me. Next, let's move down to performance. These are some pretty important settings. They're going to control how well Painter performs. Up at the top, we have memory usage. It's showing us how much memory Painter is using out of our available memory. And it says we can set the memory usage to 100%, but it may not increase performance. What you want to do is you want to use as much memory as you can for Corel Painter while still saving some for other things. You need some memory just to run your computer, and you might need some if you're multitasking with other applications. If you set this somewhere in the range of 60 to 80%, that's really going to be your best bet. If you have less than 16 gigabytes of RAM, you'll probably want to set it closer to 60. If you have more than 16 gigabytes of RAM, then you'll probably want to set it closer to 80. And if you don't know what to set it to, then just set it around 70, somewhere in the middle. Beneath that, we have multi-core usage, and if your computer has more than one core, then here's where you can choose how many cores to use. Similar to the memory usage, you want to save some cores for running your computer and for multitasking, and the rest you can dedicate to Corel Painter. You can experiment by lowering this or increasing it to see if it makes a difference, but in general, you just want to leave this set right in the middle. My computer has 6 logical cores and 6 virtual cores, so I could set this up to 12, but it wouldn't make Corel Painter run any faster, so I'll just go ahead and leave it set to 6. Beneath that, we have scratch drive. If you have more than one hard drive installed, you can set one of them to be a scratch drive. I recommend that you do that. I'm going to choose an SSD or solid state drive for my scratch drive, and this is just a spare drive that I just use as a scratch drive and a cache for other applications. So I'll choose that. What this is going to do is it's going to create an additional drive that Corel Painter can write some stuff to, like undo states and other things. It'll improve your performance a little bit, so go ahead and set this up. It says for optimal performance, a second physical drive is recommended. So you wouldn't want to try to use this with a thumb drive or an external USB drive. It needs to be a hard drive that's installed inside your computer. Beneath that, we have undo levels. We looked at undo earlier, and it can undo brush strokes and redo brush strokes, and you have a limited amount of states. By default, it's set to 32, so I can make 32 marks, and once I go beyond that, I can't do any more undos. It says you can set the maximum number of undo levels to 256, but it will impact performance. And that's because your computer has to remember every single undo state. So it has to remember your last 32 brush strokes if it's set for 32, or if it's set much higher, then it has to remember that many more brush strokes. You're probably not going to do 245 undos. So you have to kind of figure out what the best number for you is. For me, I find that 9 works well. It's low enough to where it's going to improve performance a little bit, but it's high enough to where I have at least a few undos to work with. For me personally, I prefer to do rather than undo, so another good reason to set your undos lower is so that you're not spending all day undoing and redoing. It kind of forces you to move forward. And beneath that, we have the view options. We looked at this a little bit earlier. These can be found up in the properties bar when you have the magnifier selected, so you can turn them on and off here as well. Now down here at the bottom, it says you must restart Painter for the performance settings to take effect. So if you change any of this stuff up here, with the exception of the view options, you'll need to restart Corel Painter to experience a change in performance. If you want to learn more about improving Corel Painter's performance and optimizing your computer for digital painting, I'll refer you to a reference PDF that you can check out. Now let's move on down to shapes. This gives us some options for when we're working with the vector shape tools. We're going to be discussing shapes later, so I'm going to skip over this for now. Same goes for cloning. This will let us set some preferences for cloning, and we'll look at that later when we're dealing with cloning. Beneath that, we have tablet, and here's where we can set up our tablet preferences. We looked at this earlier. We can use this to select a Wacom device or an RTS device like a Windows tablet. So depending on what kind of tablet you're using, you'd want to choose the appropriate device here. If you're using a Wacom alternative like XP Pen or Huion or UG, those are using WinTab. And if you want to apply these changes, you must restart Corel Painter. Beneath that, we have the multi-touch options, which lets you pan and zoom and rotate the canvas. You can disable multi-touch in Corel Painter here, but you can also turn it on and off using an express key on your tablet to just temporarily enable and disable it. So this would be permanently disabling it if you turn this off. And then beneath that, you can choose whether or not you want to use Wacom and Windows Touch, which is recommended, or you use just Wacom Touch or just Windows Touch. You may find that one of these options works better than the others, but for me, Wacom and Windows Touch works the best. And then beneath that, we have connections. We're not going to be using connections, so we can just skip over that. And that's it. We're done with the preferences. We can click on OK.